In the earlier episode, we talked about the Philippine Professional Standards for Teachers, which is the PPST. And we rationalized over the need for it, considering that things have changed, K-12 is here, ASEAN integration pushed it, globalization is just around the corner. And I presented to you the 7 domains. And these domains include the first one. The most important, I think, of them all is the content knowledge and pedagogy. Okay? Because content knowledge is what's right here, and pedagogy is the heart of teaching. And this is the reason why we have this episode. Content knowledge and pedagogy will be one of the core competency of being a teacher. As you all know, when you speak of pedagogy, that means that is the heart of teaching. Okay? That is the heart of teaching. All right. And if you want to understand that heart of teaching, you have to know that that should be developmentally appropriate, okay, developmentally appropriate, and of course, it has to be meaningful. Okay, I will go to the details of this later on. Another thing you have to remember in as far as the first domain is concerned is the fact that it is all about the application. It's about the application of the theories and also the application of the practice of teaching. Okay, we will also go into that. In fact, when you study the PPST, you will get to immerse yourself with the responsibility to understand every bit of information that you can find in the strands of each domain. Aside from that, if application of theories and practice is the concern, you have to remember and you have to be reminded that, therefore, it should be grounded. It should be grounded on the big word, research. Okay, and we'll talk about that later. That's why don't be surprised if there will be a lot of questions in the board related to research. And of course, because of that, you should have your proficient use. It's not only the use, but it is the proficient use of the mother tongue, Filipino, and English. Okay, that's another one. So there's the proficient use of those languages. Okay, the means by which we teach. It's the proficient use of the mother tongue, Filipino, and English. And of course, you should also be familiar with the use of communication. Okay, you should know how to communicate. You should be able to know how to use teaching strategies. And finally, you should know how to use technology. All right. Now, if you are really a good teacher, you know all of these, but you understand very well, you will understand very well that there is a need for the interconnectedness, okay, of the curriculum. Okay, the interconnectedness of the curriculum, where you talk about within the curriculum and across the curriculum. And having said all of these, you have to remember that the pedagogy and the content knowledge you have should be purposeful. Okay, let me summarize what I have just placed in a mind map as I present to you the first domain, which is content knowledge and pedagogy. We talked about it is the heart of teaching, and therefore, you should know very well it has to be developmentally appropriate. It should be meaningful, that art of teaching. You should be proficient in the use of the mother tongue, Filipino, and English. You should know how to use communication, the teaching strategies and technology. You should also be able to apply the theories and the practice of teaching. And therefore, if you want to really believe in the theories and application and practice of teaching, then it should be grounded on research. Okay. And finally, there should be a curriculum that is interconnected within and across. All right. And don't miss the fact that you need to communicate the teaching strategies and the technology. I'll go to each of these one by one. All right. Teachers who understand the content knowledge and pedagogy should be able to, interconnect the curricular areas, and it's specific in the PPST that it should be within and across. This is where you have to be familiar with the spiral integration or articulation. Spiral, it goes like that. The subject is repeated and repeated. The subjects are repeated and repeated, but are increasing in depth and in application. For example, there is addition in grade 1 as there is addition in grade 12, but that same addition as repeated all throughout the K-12 is deepening in its application and context. When you say horizontal is you cross from one subject to another in the same given time. Meaning, for example, the learnings in algebra converts, the dollar and peso exchange rate in the study of economics, something like that. So that becomes, horizontal articulation or horizontal integration. It can be vertical when the subjects over time is deepening. For example, you go algebra, you go physics, you go trigonometry, and that deepens it. So that's when you're interconnecting the curriculum within and across. All right. Now, the next will be the use of communication. As you can see, communication is the exchange of my world of meaning with your world of meaning. Communication is when you have a sender, and that sender, okay, of course, communicates with the receiver, and that sender uses a medium, all right, and of course, it uses a channel, all right, and that receiver will provide for the feedback, and that communication channel happens in a context. Okay, a teacher should be able to know this very well. The verbal versus non-verbal, the paralanguage, the use of body movements and so on. These should all be understood by the teacher. And the role of the sender is the encoder of the message using a channel. And of course, the receiver will decode and will provide for the feedback. And the exam will always test if you understand that feedback is almost always the most neglected part of the communication process. So that goes for that use of communication. Now, as to the teaching strategies, we will have a separate discussion on that. That is the reason why in CBRC, I don't want people to just be preparing for the test by just reading questions and familiarizing selves with how the question should be asked and what are the options and the familiar answer among the 4 options. So that's only reviewing to the test. I keep on repeating that because if you really want to become a teacher, you should review for your competencies, not only in the level of knowledge, but in the level of skills and in the level of attitude and habits, the KSAH of competencies. And finally, the use of technology. Now, with regards to the use of technology, you will always be reminded. You will always be reminded of the 3 interacting elements in the modern times. Okay, there is a competency that we're talking about. That's the content. Okay, the content competency. Okay, or the content knowledge. All right. Then you also have, aside from that, the pedagogical knowledge, and you have the technological knowledge. This is where you have to be familiar with what you call the TPAC model. Technology, pedagogy, okay, content, knowledge, the TPAC model. You have to be familiar as well with the matrix, the integration matrix, the technology integration matrix, where there is entry, adoption, adaptation, there is infusion, and of course, there is transformation. I repeat that. That's the 5 levels in the technology integration matrix, where the first one is entry, the other one is adoption, then adaptation, then infusion, then transformation. In the review, we will go deeper into understanding each, together with whether it's active or whether it's already goal-directed or goal-oriented across the curriculum. The next element of content knowledge and pedagogy is the proficient use of the mother tongue, the Filipino and English. You might be wondering why the K-12 actually prescribed that from kinder to up to grade 3, there is the use of the mother tongue. Many of those who come from the old school would assert that, why is that so? We should learn English in the earliest possible because English is the universal language, and why do you have to go to the mother tongue when in one classroom there are possibly several mother tongues spoken by the children? Some children are actually having the mother tongue of English. Some would have Tagalog, some would have Bisaya, and so on. And the teacher is just there. The teacher may not be able to speak all those mother tongue languages. That's going to be an area of debate. But the logic behind the use of the mother tongue from kinder to grade 3 in the K-12 curriculum is because they want to develop the thinking first before the language, because the language of the thinking is the mother tongue. And therefore, a young child who is thinking in Filipino will have to develop that thinking in Filipino before the child actually shifts from Filipino to English. And that goes not only to writing or reading, but that starts with thinking. That's why there is that use of the mother tongue. Of course, the Constitution prescribes that we can use Filipino and English as medium of instruction in the classroom. Okay, now, all right. As we continue, the heart of teaching in pedagogy should be meaningful. And remember this, it can only be meaningful. Learning can only be meaningful if it is contextualized. Repeat that, it's contextualized. And when you say contextualized, that means it has useful application in the life of a child, in their lives. They're able to apply what they know. They're able to relate into what they know. Okay? And that's why it should be meaningful. And by meaningful, it means it is contextualized. By contextualized, it means it is applicable in the life of the child. Okay, and of course, the developmental milestones, okay, of the preschooler to the schooler to adolescents, these should all be, very, very easy for you because you have to understand it as a teacher from the toddler that you may have in the preschool, to the early schooler age, and later on, the trust versus mistrust, the autonomy versus shame and doubt, the initiative versus guilt, the industry versus inferiority, the identity versus role confusion, and so on. You have to be very familiar with that. The Kohlberg's theory, all of those elements, you can learn more about that in the review, but don't forget to at least study the 4, the Freud, from the oral to the anal, to the other portion, to the phallic and latency and so on. You have to remember those. Erickson's psychosocial theory, Kohlberg's moral development theory, and of course, Piaget's cognitive theory. And related to that will be the discussion about the IQ, the formula of the IQ, the elements of the EQ as introduced by Goleman, okay, and of course the adversity quotient, the AQ, and the spirituality quotient or the SQ. All of these will have to be detailed to you in the review. Okay, now that's to be developmentally appropriate. Now, related to this, if you want to be developmentally and appropriate and meaningful, don't miss the concept. You have to always bear in mind the concept of differentiated instruction. Okay, therefore your instruction has to be differentiated. All right. Imagine the classroom that I described earlier with the use of the mother tongue. That's why it's called the mother tongue-based multilingual education, because there are differences. in how they actually think and in how they use the mother tongue, in the way they communicate and the way they learn. Okay. Now, another concept you have to be familiar with content knowledge and pedagogy is that it has to be purposeful. It has to be purposeful. And therefore, the thinking of the child should be your priority. Metacognitive ability of the child should be developed. And that's why a teacher who does not understand how to think about thinking, or lacks the critical thinking, or lacks the creative thinking, is probably a teacher who will not be effective in developing this to a child. Why? Because you cannot teach something you do not have. And I want that very, very clear. If you have to teach, and if you want to be purposive in the way you're teaching content and you're using pedagogy as the heart of what you do in the classroom, you have to remember that you have to focus on the higher order thinking skills. You have to develop critical thinking. You have to develop creativity. Okay, and that's a favor you will do the child, because, memorization and just comprehension are lower order thinking skills, but you want to go higher. Okay, you want to go higher than that. Okay, you want them to be able to analyze. You, of course, apply first, then analyze. Okay, then synthesize and evaluate. You want them to go higher. You want the children to be able to create. Okay, not only to memorize. After all, what's the point of memorizing things when Google makes it very accessible and available for all of us? Now, when you speak of the theories and practice of teaching, you have to understand all the teaching theories. Okay, you have to be very, very familiar with all the theories of teaching and learning, which will come handy to you when you review. And of course, the practice, how do you practice that? You would notice that the theories makes teaching a science, and the practice makes teaching an art. Therefore, teaching becomes both a science and an art. If you will be asked in the board exam, what makes teaching science? The answer is because it is backed up by theories. Now, what developed theories are actually the practice. Okay, and the practice became researched, and the research becomes theories, and the theories now guide practice. And that's the three sources of knowledge in teaching, making it a science. I repeat that. The practice of teaching is subjected to research, and research now creates the theories, and the theories now guide the practice. And that's where the evolving science of teaching come in. And the art of teaching is, done in its practice, because the art of teaching is something that develops over time. And that's why from the beginning teacher to a proficient teacher, to a highly proficient teacher, to a distinguished teacher, it takes time, because that practice of teaching evolves over time. And when you speak of research, of course, the review will also provide you with a lot of information about the process of research, the discipline of research, from the conceptual phase to the design phase to the empirical phase, okay, to the application, and of course to the analysis rather, and the dissemination. I repeat that that's the process of research. The first one is the conceptualization phase. When you conceptualize, identify the problem, look into the knowledge that are already available, related literature that gives you depth into the knowledge, or that you don't know if you're not just repeating the research that information is already made available. So you define the problem so that you know exactly what you're looking for. Then the design will talk about how you will sample, what instruments you will use, what type of research are you using. That's the design phase. Then, of course, you gather data, empirical data at that. Then once the data and information are available, you analyze them, and then you summarize everything so that you can disseminate. These are the processes of of research. Then you would have the quantitative versus qualitative researches. You have to be very familiar with that. What is an action research? What are all of these? This will all be tackled during the review process. Okay? So, to summarize, The first domain of the PPST is content, knowledge, and pedagogy. It's what's right here. What's the level of your content knowledge, and are you ready to teach? And in this, you realize that the curriculum is not a standalone per subject curricula, but it's actually interconnected within and across. This is where we talked about the spiral, vertical, and horizontal integration. The use of communication as an art of exchanging meanings between the sender and the receiver, and the flow of information, decoding and encoding in a continuous process there. And the teaching strategies related to the practice of the theories and the art of teaching, of course, and the technology, where you talk about the difference between digitize, then digitalize, and digital transformation. All of these, the matrix, okay, where you enter, there's entry, there's adoption, there's adaptation, there's infusion, there's transformation. Okay, you want to understand that. You need to understand the TPAC model, where there's technology, knowledge, there is pedagogical knowledge, and there is the content knowledge. The proficient use of the mother tongue being the language of thinking, Filipino and English being there. We talked about that in Gen Ed. And the heart of teaching being meaningful, if it is contextualized, or if it is something that a child can use in his life, and developmentally appropriate, putting into consideration the development theories that I mentioned earlier. If the teacher knows how to use the heart of teaching meaningfully and developmentally appropriate, then she will be using differentiated instruction or differentiated teaching. And it has to be purposeful. If you want it purposeful, you have to look forward to what the child would be after that experience with your learning journey. And this is where you teach the child how to think metacognitively. This is where you want the child to be ready for critical thinking. You want the child to think in the higher order. You're not limiting it to memorization, and you're not limiting it only to comprehension, but you want application. Okay, you want analysis, you want synthesis, you want evaluation, you want the child to be able to create. And therefore, we talked about the application of the theories and the practice, citing that the theories make teaching a science, and the practice makes teaching an art. And such theory is derived from research, which subjects practice into the discipline of research process, leading to theories that would guide practice. It has to be grounded in research. And that's why there is also a use of the concept of evidence-based teaching. Evidence-based teaching is when you use the research evidence with your expertise, but having in mind your students as the beneficiary of the research you read about, or the research you perform and learn about, and the expertise you achieved over the years of studying and of teaching, and then with the end in mind that the child is able to learn. So thank you so much for watching this important domain number 1 of the PPST, Content Knowledge and Pedagogy. You watch out for more, but if you have not subscribed to this channel, don't wait until such time that only the subscribers will be able to benefit from the videos that I'm offering to you for free. So put in your comments. If you have some questions, just put it in the comment, but don't forget to subscribe to this channel. And please do me a favor. Please tell other people about this channel and make them subscribe as well, so that the benefit will not be limited to you. God bless you. Stay safe.